Farmer Rajiv had spent his entire life in the village, working the land that had been in his family for generations. Every morning, long before the sun rose, he would step out of his small clay-walled house, breathe in the fresh, earthy smell of the fields, and begin his work. The land was rough, filled with stubborn soil and patches where nothing seemed to grow easily, but Rajiv loved it. It was not just a farm. It was a living memory of his parents, his childhood, and every small victory and failure he had faced. One morning, as the first streaks of sunlight painted the sky in orange and pink, Rajiv walked toward the far end of his field. His routine was familiar: check the crops, see if any weeds had grown overnight, make sure the irrigation channels were working. But today something caught his eye. At the far corner, a massive old tree stood alone, its trunk thick and gnarled, its roots twisting like the hands of an old man. For as long as he could remember, the tree had been there, silently marking the border of his field. But today there was something unusual. Water was seeping from a crack in the trunk. It was slow at first, almost unnoticed, but Rajiv could see the soil around the base darkened with moisture. Curious, he crouched down to inspect it more closely. He had seen trees bleed sap, trees fall ill, but water, that was something he had never seen before. He touched the wet bark with his rough, calloused fingers and frowned. It wasn't rainwater, it was coming from the tree itself. The thought made him uneasy. Rajiv had always been a practical man. To him, everything had a purpose. A tree was supposed to give shade, fruits, or wood, but a tree leaking water? That was unusual, and it worried him. What if it was hollow inside? What if it suddenly fell and damaged his crops, or even worse, someone got hurt? His mind raced with possibilities. The more he stared at the old tree, the more he felt that it was a problem waiting to happen. He stood up and walked around it, examining it from every angle. The branches stretched wide, some of them low and heavy, almost touching the ground. Birds perched here and there, chirping and hopping from one branch to another, completely unaware of the concern that had gripped the farmer. A few crows cawed loudly, as if warning him to stay away. Rajiv ignored them. His life was one of hard work and responsibility, and he had always believed in dealing with problems directly. As he walked back toward his house to fetch his tools, memories of his childhood flickered in his mind. He remembered playing around this very tree when he was a boy. The tree had always been a part of the land, a silent witness to the changes around it. He had climbed its branches, hid behind its trunk during games with friends, and even rested under its shade during long summer days. But now, that same tree seemed like a threat, a potential danger he could no longer ignore. Over breakfast, he could not stop thinking about the tree. His small kitchen smelled of freshly cooked rice and lentils, but the aroma did little to calm his mind. His wife noticed his silence and asked what was bothering him. Rajiv explained about the tree and the water leaking from its trunk. His wife, ever the gentle voice of caution, hesitated before speaking. She reminded him of the tree's age, its history, and how it had survived storms and seasons for decades. But Rajiv, determined as always, listened politely, but didn't let her words change his mind. He had to protect the land. He had to make sure the fields remained safe. That tree could not be left standing if it posed a risk. He decided that today, after finishing his morning chores, he would take a closer look at the tree with tools in hand. He would decide once and for all whether it needed to be removed. The sun had risen higher by the time he reached the tree again. The field shimmered under the morning light, the crops swaying gently in the breeze. Rajiv stood at the base of the tree, looking up at its enormous height. Its thick canopy created a shadow that stretched across the land. He placed his hand on the trunk, feeling its rough texture, and wondered how much life this tree had seen. It had survived countless storms, droughts, and human interference, yet here it was, leaking water as if it had a secret to reveal. As he circled the tree, he noticed something else. The soil around it was unusually soft and wet, and small insects crawled near the base. The water seemed to have created a tiny puddle, attracting ants and other tiny creatures. Rajiv knelt down, watching them for a moment. Nature had its own rhythm, he realized. Even something that seemed wrong at first glance had its place in the larger scheme of life. Yet practicality won over wonder. He could not ignore the risk. A few villagers passed by the field carrying baskets of produce. They stopped when they saw him near the tree and greeted him. Curious, they asked what he was doing. Rajiv explained calmly about the water and his concern that the tree might be dangerous. Some villagers frowned, others laughed nervously. They had always seen the tree as just a landmark, a part of the village's history, and could not imagine it being harmful. But Rajiv was not easily swayed. He returned home later in the day, his mind still occupied with the tree. After lunch, he fetched his old axe from the shed. The blade was worn but sharp, and the handle was smooth from years of use. He felt the familiar weight in his hands, a sense of readiness coursing through him. He knew what he had to do. But as he walked back to the tree, he paused. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember the laughter of his younger days, climbing the tree, feeling invincible. The memory brought a small, wistful smile to his face. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the field. Rajiv set the axe down for a moment and looked at the tree with a mix of respect and apprehension. It was old, stronger than it looked, and yet fragile in its own way. He knew that chopping it down would not just change the land. It would change something deeper, something he could not yet name. But he also knew that life demanded decisions, often difficult ones, and he had chosen to act rather than wait. As evening approached, Rajiv prepared for the task. He checked the rope he planned to use to guide the tree's fall, cleared some of the surrounding grass, and marked the direction carefully. The air was still, except for the distant calls of birds returning to their nests. The villagers, curious and concerned, watched from a distance. Some whispered prayers, others shook their heads in quiet worry. Rajiv felt the weight of responsibility, but he did not falter. Night fell slowly, and the sky turned a deep indigo dotted with stars. Rajiv returned home briefly to eat and rest, knowing that tomorrow he would face the old tree fully. He lay on his cot that night thinking about life, growth, and the strange ways nature sometimes reveals secrets. The water leaking from the tree seemed like a puzzle meant for him to solve. He wondered what it could mean, what hidden forces were at work, and whether he was ready for the consequences of his actions. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of falling trees, rushing water, and the life that stirred quietly in the land around him. Rajiv awoke before dawn, the familiar sounds of roosters and morning birds greeting him. The tree waited silently at the edge of his field, as if knowing that the next day would change everything. With a deep breath, he stepped outside, ready to face the challenge, unaware of the surprises that nature had in store, and how this tree, so ordinary at first glance, would soon teach everyone a lesson that no one could have imagined. The morning sun rose slowly over the fields, painting everything in gold. Farmer Rajiv stepped outside with a sense of determination, his heart steady but heavy with thoughts. The old tree waited silently at the corner of his land, almost daring him to act. Its massive trunk cast a long shadow over the crops, and the soft rustling of its leaves in the wind made the scene feel alive, almost watchful. Rajiv's mind replayed the memories of his childhood, the laughter and games, the afternoons spent under its shade. He shook his head, pushing aside the nostalgia. Today was not about memories. It was about responsibility. He grabbed his worn axe, checking the handle and blade carefully. The tool had served him for decades, and though its edges had dulled slightly over time, it was still strong enough to do the job. Rajiv took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. The village was slowly waking up around him. Women carried water from the wells, children ran barefoot across the dusty lanes, and birds sang in the nearby trees. Life moved on in its usual rhythm, but for Rajiv, today was different. As he walked toward the old tree, a few neighbors noticed him and stopped to greet him. They were familiar with his determination, his unwillingness to leave problems unresolved. "Morning, Rajiv," one of them called. "Going to the field so early?" Rajiv nodded politely but did not stop. His mind was focused on the task ahead. Some villagers had started to gather at a distance, whispering among themselves. Word had spread that Rajiv was planning to chop down the old tree. Some shook their heads, thinking it unnecessary, while others seemed curious to see what would happen. The tree had stood for generations, surviving storms, droughts, and the passage of time. It was a landmark, a part of the village's identity, and the idea of cutting it down made many uneasy. Rajiv reached the base of the tree and studied it carefully. Its trunk was thick, far wider than any other tree in the village, and its roots had dug deep into the soil over decades. Water still oozed slowly from the crack in the trunk, forming tiny streams that trickled down to the earth below. He knelt down and touched the wet bark, feeling the unusual coldness and the life within. For a moment he hesitated. It was as if the tree was trying to communicate something, warning him to pause. But responsibility outweighed hesitation. He had made his decision. He began by clearing the grass and small shrubs around the base, making space for the work ahead. The sound of rustling leaves and distant bird calls filled the air. Rajiv worked methodically, tying a sturdy rope around the trunk to guide its fall. He knew the tree would not give way easily. It had stood through countless storms and seasons, and its strength was not to be underestimated. Every step required focus, every motion precision. He could not afford a mistake. As he prepared the axe, he noticed a group of children watching from a distance. Their eyes were wide with curiosity, some whispering to each other about what might happen. Rajiv remembered his own childhood, standing under the shade of the tree, imagining the adventures he could have. He smiled faintly, a pang of nostalgia passing through him, but he did not allow it to stop his work. The tree had served its purpose, he thought, and now it was time to move forward. One of the older villagers approached, his face lined with years of experience. "Rajiv," he said quietly, "are you sure about this? That tree has been here longer than anyone can remember. It has given shelter, shade, and even fruit to the village. Once it falls, it will be gone forever." Rajiv looked at him and nodded slowly. "I know," he replied, "but it is leaking water from the trunk. The soil is soft and it could fall on the crops or even hurt someone. I have to do this." The older man studied Rajiv for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Just be careful," he said. "Nature has a way of surprising us." With that, Rajiv returned to his work. He took a few deep breaths, feeling the weight of the axe in his hands. He raised it and brought it down with careful precision. The first strike echoed through the morning air, sharp and heavy. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and studied the crack that had begun to form. The tree did not move, but the sound of the axe striking the trunk seemed to awaken it. Birds scattered into the sky, and the wind rustled the remaining leaves with a sudden intensity. Rajiv struck again, over and over, each swing requiring more strength and concentration. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. His arms ached, his back stiffened, but he continued. He could hear murmurs from the villagers, their voices filled with curiosity and concern. Some offered water and encouragement. Others stayed silent, unsure of what to expect. The tree, massive and ancient, seemed almost alive as it resisted, holding firm against each blow. As the sun climbed higher, Rajiv paused for a moment, leaning on the axe. He looked around at the field, at the villagers watching, at the children who had stopped playing to witness this moment. The tree had been a part of all their lives, whether they realized it or not. It had provided shade on hot days, a resting place for weary travelers, and a home for countless birds and insects. Now it was about to disappear, leaving only memories behind. He took a deep breath and struck again. Slowly, the trunk began to crack more deeply. The sound was loud, almost like a groan, and dust and small pieces of bark fell to the ground. Rajiv felt a mix of satisfaction and sadness. The tree had been a witness to so much life, and now he was changing that forever. But he reminded himself that he was doing it to protect the land, to ensure the safety of his crops and his neighbors. By midday, the base of the tree had weakened significantly. Rajiv took a break, wiping sweat from his face and drinking water from a clay pot. The villagers had moved a little closer, some whispering, some simply watching in silence. Even the children had stopped their games, mesmerized by the sight of the massive tree slowly giving way. The air felt heavy, filled with anticipation. Rajiv returned to work, determined to finish what he had started. The next few strikes were harder, each one echoing like a drumbeat in the quiet afternoon. The tree shivered slightly, branches swaying as if protesting. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the old tree began to lean. Rajiv and the villagers held their breath as it slowly, inevitably started to fall. With a thunderous crash, the tree hit the ground, sending a cloud of dust and leaves into the air. Water gushed from the crack in the trunk, soaking the earth and creating small streams that ran across the field. Rajiv stepped back, breathing heavily, staring at the fallen giant. The villagers whispered in awe, some shaking their heads, others smiling nervously. The tree, once so mighty and imposing, now lay broken but still alive in some mysterious way, as if its spirit lingered in the water that flowed from it. Rajiv felt a mix of relief and regret. He had done what he thought was necessary, but the sight of the fallen tree stirred unexpected emotions. It was strange to feel sadness for something that had been only an obstacle a few hours ago. He knelt down and touched the wet bark, feeling the cold water seep into his fingers. Life, it seemed, was not as simple as he had imagined. Even in death or in falling, the tree had its purpose. The villagers approached cautiously, some placing hands on their hearts, others examining the soil around the base. They marveled at the water that continued to flow, small streams forming little pools in the uneven ground. "I have never seen anything like this," one of them said quietly. "It is as if the tree was hiding something all this time." Rajiv nodded slowly. He felt a strange connection to the fallen tree, a sense of respect mingled with curiosity. He realized that he had acted too quickly to judge the tree's worth. Perhaps it was not just an old tree. Perhaps it had a role that he could not yet understand. But for now the task was done. The tree had fallen, the water had flowed, and the field was safe. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land, Rajiv walked among the villagers, discussing what had happened. Some suggested using the fallen trunk for firewood, while others thought it should remain in place as a source of water. The children ran around the puddles, laughing as they splashed in the small streams. The tree, though fallen, had created something unexpected: life, movement, and curiosity. Rajiv returned to his house that evening, exhausted but contemplative. He sat on the porch, watching the water glisten in the fading sunlight. The events of the day had left him with a sense of humility. Nature, he realized, had its own plans, and human understanding was only a small part of it. The old tree, though gone from its upright position, had revealed a secret that no one had anticipated. And in doing so, it had reminded everyone that life often holds surprises that cannot be predicted or controlled. Night fell over the village, and the stars appeared one by one in the deep sky. Rajiv could hear the distant calls of owls and the rustling of small animals around the fallen tree. He knew that tomorrow, and the days to come, would reveal more about the mysterious water and what it might bring. For now, he allowed himself to rest, feeling the quiet satisfaction of having faced a difficult challenge, and the growing sense that this tree, in its own strange way, had left a gift behind. The next morning, Farmer Rajiv woke up to the gentle sound of birds singing in the distance. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft golden light over the fields. His eyes immediately turned to the far corner where the old tree had fallen the day before. From a distance, it looked quiet, harmless, and yet alive in a way he couldn't explain. The water that had leaked from its trunk now lay in shallow pools around the base, glinting in the morning light. Rajiv felt a mix of curiosity and apprehension as he stepped outside. The villagers had already begun to gather near the edge of his field. Some were carrying baskets, others had walked over just to see what might be happening. Their whispers filled the air, a mixture of speculation and excitement. Rajiv noticed that even the children, who had been laughing and playing yesterday, were now standing silently, eyes wide with wonder. He had never seen such a reaction to a fallen tree, and for a moment, he felt a shiver of anticipation himself. He walked carefully toward the fallen giant, noting the way the soil around the base had turned dark and soft from the water. Small streams trickled away, winding through the field like tiny silver ribbons. Rajiv crouched down, letting his fingers brush through the cool, fresh water. It was strange and beautiful. He had expected decay, mud, and mess, but this felt alive, almost as if the tree had been hiding something all along. As he explored, he noticed movement in the pools. Tiny silvery shapes darted beneath the surface. Rajiv's eyes widened. Fish? How could fish have appeared overnight in the shallow water of a fallen tree? He leaned closer, marveling at the delicate creatures swimming swiftly. Their scales caught the sunlight, glinting like tiny jewels. He could hear soft murmurs from the villagers behind him, and when they saw the fish, gasps filled the air. It's like a pond appeared overnight," one of the older women whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "How is this possible?" Rajiv did not answer immediately. He felt a strange mixture of pride, surprise, and humility. He had chopped down the tree thinking he was protecting his land, but instead it seemed he had uncovered something far greater than he had imagined. He realized then that nature often worked in ways humans could not fully understand. The tree, which he had judged as a problem, had been hiding a source of life, a secret that only revealed itself when the time was right. Children began to edge closer to the water, pointing at the fish and giggling as they dipped their fingers into the cool puddles. The villagers murmured among themselves, debating what this could mean. Some thought it was a blessing, a gift from the land. Others simply shook their heads, unable to comprehend the sudden change. Rajiv stood quietly, watching the interaction between people, water, and life. It was a small moment, yet it felt monumental. Over the next few hours, word of the water and fish spread through the village. More people came to see, bringing cups and small containers to observe the tiny pond. Rajiv's field, once quiet and ordinary, had become a place of curiosity and fascination. Birds returned, chirping and fluttering around the new water source. Even a few animals wandered closer than usual, drawn by the moisture and the life it supported. The land felt vibrant, almost as if the tree spirit lingered in the water, blessing the surrounding soil. Rajiv walked around the fallen tree, noting the way the water had begun to pool naturally in certain areas. Small plants, dormant for years, had started to sprout along the edges, their leaves glistening with dew. He crouched down, brushing soil aside to get a closer look. Tiny roots were beginning to grow in response to the water, and he could see the beginnings of a micro-ecosystem forming before his eyes. Every detail amazed him, from the insects crawling carefully along the wet bark to the birds drinking from the new pools. The villagers had begun talking to one another about what they were seeing. Some suggested building small channels to direct the water toward the crops, while others simply wanted to leave it alone, fearing that tampering might ruin what had naturally occurred. Rajiv listened carefully, taking in their opinions. He realized that while he had acted alone in chopping down the tree, the consequences were now shared by everyone. This small miracle, born from what had seemed like destruction, was becoming a collective experience. As midday approached, the sun climbed high, warming the field and glinting off the water. Rajiv found a shaded spot nearby and sat down to rest, watching the children splash gently in the pools. A quiet smile spread across his face. He thought back to the decision he had made just a day ago. If he had hesitated, if he had ignored the problem, none of this would have happened. And yet, he could not shake the feeling that the tree itself had guided him, that the water had been waiting for him to act. He was still lost in thought when one of the older villagers approached. "Rajiv," the man said, pointing to the water, "do you see what this tree has done? It was never just a tree. It held life inside it. It protected water that nourished the land. We never noticed because we took it for granted." Rajiv nodded slowly. "I thought I was solving a problem," he said quietly. "I thought I was protecting the field. But it seems it was protecting something far bigger than I understood." The older man smiled, his eyes reflecting a mixture of wisdom and wonder. "That's the way of nature," he said. "Sometimes what we see as obstacles are gifts in disguise." The tree knew its purpose, even if we did not. Rajiv spent the rest of the afternoon observing the pond. He noticed the fish moving gracefully, the insects skimming the water's surface, and the plants slowly adjusting to their new environment. The land that had seemed ordinary just a day ago now felt alive, buzzing with subtle energy. It was as if the field itself was thanking him for allowing this hidden life to emerge. As evening approached, a few neighboring villagers, having heard the news, arrived to see the pond and the life it had attracted. They marveled at the sudden transformation, their eyes wide with amazement. Some knelt by the water to study the fish, others simply sat quietly, soaking in the serene beauty. Rajiv felt a growing sense of humility. He had always believed that hard work alone shaped the land, but now he realized that patience, respect, and a little faith in nature's wisdom were equally important. The sun began to set, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. Rajiv stood and surveyed the scene one last time before returning to his house. The pond reflected the fading light, sparkling like a small jewel amid the earthy tones of the field. He knew that tomorrow would bring more surprises, that the water would continue to shape the land and life around it in ways he could not yet predict. That night, Rajiv lay on his cot staring at the ceiling and thinking about the day's events. The tree which he had feared and judged had revealed a hidden treasure. Life had emerged where he least expected it. He realized that sometimes the most ordinary things, an old tree, a patch of soil, a leak of water, could hold extraordinary secrets. He thought about the villagers, the children, and the tiny fish in the puddles. He thought about how easily he had dismissed the tree as useless, how quickly he had acted without fully understanding its role, and yet he also recognized that action had its place. Without his decision, the hidden water might never have been discovered. There was a delicate balance between caution and courage, between patience and action. Sleep finally came, But even in dreams, Rajiv saw the pond, the fish, the insects, and the tiny plants thriving around the fallen tree. He saw the children laughing, the villagers marveling, and the quiet magic that had emerged from what had seemed like destruction. He realized that this was only the beginning, that the tree's gift was still unfolding, and that life had a mysterious way of surprising everyone when they least expected it. By morning, the pond had grown slightly larger. Rain from the night before had filled the shallow depressions in the soil, and tiny ripples danced across the surface. Rajiv walked toward the tree again, this time with a sense of wonder rather than apprehension. The water seemed more vibrant, the fish more active, and the air around the field felt charged with life. He knelt down, touching the cool surface and marveling at the delicate balance of nature that had emerged so suddenly. Villagers began arriving in greater numbers. Some brought small tools to observe and study the water. Others simply wanted to see the miracle for themselves. Rajiv welcomed them quietly, sharing what he had observed. Everyone could see that this was more than just a puddle of water. It was a living, breathing ecosystem that had appeared almost overnight. Conversations buzzed with excitement, awe, and curiosity. People wondered what other secrets the land might be hiding. By midday, the small pond had become the center of life in the field. Birds swooped down to drink, insects hummed near the edges, and the fish darted gracefully beneath the water. Rajiv watched, feeling a mixture of pride, humility, and amazement. The fallen tree had given more than he could have imagined, and in doing so, it had changed the way he saw the land, the villagers, and even himself. For the first time, he understood that life often had its own plans, far beyond human control. He had acted with good intentions, but the true magic had come from the tree and the hidden water it had guarded. And as he stood there watching the field come alive, Rajiv realized that this was a story that would be remembered for generations, a story of patience, courage, and the quiet miracles that nature could offer to those who took the time to notice. The next morning, Farmer Rajiv woke up to the familiar sounds of the village. Roosters crowed, children's laughter floated in the air, and the soft murmur of villagers beginning their day filled the quiet lanes. But unlike any other morning, his mind was already at the edge of the field, thinking about the fallen tree and the small pond that had appeared from its trunk. He stepped outside with a sense of excitement mixed with unease, wondering what new surprises the day might bring. As he approached the spot, his heart skipped a beat. Overnight, the small puddles of water had expanded, flowing gently into the field in narrow streams. The tiny pond had grown larger than he had imagined, and the water sparkled in the early morning sunlight. Fish swam actively, moving gracefully from one pool to another, and small insects hovered above the surface. Even a few frogs had appeared, croaking softly from the edges. It was as if the land itself had awakened, energized by something hidden beneath the tree. Villagers had already started to arrive, drawn by the sight of the water. Some carried buckets, curious to see if it could be used for irrigation, while others simply came to witness the sudden transformation. Murmurs filled the air as everyone realized that this was not an ordinary puddle. The water was clear, fresh, and teeming with life. People knelt by the edge, dipping their hands and marveling at the tiny fish that darted away from their fingers. Rajiv walked slowly around the pond, observing everything carefully. He noticed that the soil around the base of the fallen tree had become richer and softer, almost as if it had been nourished by the water itself. Small plants that had been struggling for months were suddenly standing taller, their leaves glistening with moisture. The crops nearby, too, seemed to perk up, stretching toward the sunlight with renewed vigor. He could not help but feel amazed. What had seemed like destruction yesterday had become a source of unexpected life today. A few older villagers approached him, their faces a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Rajiv," one of them said, pointing to the water, "do you see what this tree has done? It has not just fallen, it has given life. The water, the fish, the plants, it is as if the land itself is thanking us." Rajiv nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of pride and humility. He had acted thinking he was solving a problem, but nature had shown him that it had a plan of its own. The tree had held water, hidden and protected, waiting for the right moment to reveal it. And now that moment had come. By midday, the pond had attracted more life. Birds swooped down to drink and bathe, hopping carefully on the edges of the small pools. A family of deer appeared at the far end, cautiously approaching the water to drink. Even a pair of wild rabbits ventured close, sniffing the air and exploring the damp soil. The field, once quiet and ordinary, had become a center of life, movement, and energy. Villagers could not believe what they were witnessing. Rajiv decided to investigate further. He followed the streams of water flowing from the fallen tree, tracing their path through the field. To his surprise, the water had begun to form tiny channels, weaving through the crops and nourishing them naturally. He noticed that the plants closest to the streams were greener, healthier, and taller than those farther away. It was a visible, undeniable sign of the tree's hidden contribution. Children ran along the edges of the pond, splashing gently and laughing. Their voices echoed across the field, mixing with the soft croaking of frogs and the chirping of birds. Rajiv watched them, a small smile tugging at his lips. The pond had become more than just a source of water. It had become a place where life and joy flourished. People were talking, sharing stories, and marveling at the sudden abundance that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. As the day progressed, Rajiv noticed something even more surprising. Tiny plants that had never grown in certain parts of the field were now sprouting along the edges of the water. Wildflowers with delicate petals and vibrant colors began to bloom, attracting bees and butterflies. The air felt sweeter, fresher, and alive with energy. It was as if the tree had not only protected water, but had also been a guardian of life, ensuring that the land could thrive in ways no one had imagined. A group of villagers began discussing ways to use the water for irrigation. Some suggested building small channels to direct it toward the crops, while others worried that interfering might disturb the natural balance. Rajiv listened quietly, weighing their suggestions. He realized that this was no longer just about protecting his land. It was about understanding, respecting, and working with the forces of nature. The tree, though fallen, had become a teacher, showing them the hidden potential of life around them. By evening, more animals had appeared, drawn by the water. Birds of different species hopped and flitted around the edges of the pond, while frogs croaked in harmony with the gentle rustling of leaves. Even a small herd of cows wandered closer, drinking from the streams that had formed naturally. Rajiv observed them carefully, making sure that the delicate balance of life was maintained. The pond had become a miniature ecosystem, and every living creature seemed to know its place within it. The villagers began to call it a blessing. Some knelt in gratitude, others simply sat quietly, observing the miracle that had unfolded. Children continued to play, laughing and chasing one another around the water. Rajiv felt a sense of awe and wonder that he could not put into words. The tree, which he had thought of as a problem, had revealed a gift far greater than he could have imagined. Life had emerged where he least expected it, and the field was now alive in a way it had never been before. That night, as Rajiv returned home, he felt a deep sense of peace. He could hear the soft calls of frogs, the rustle of small animals, and the gentle gurgle of water flowing through the newly formed channels. The land had changed, the pond had changed, and perhaps even he had changed. He realized that sometimes what seems like an ending is only the beginning. The fallen tree had opened the door to a world that had been hidden in plain sight, and it was now up to everyone to honor and protect it. As he lay on his cot, Rajiv thought about the lessons of the day. Nature had a rhythm, a timing, and a way of revealing its secrets. His actions had triggered a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The tree, though gone from its upright position, had left behind water, life, and hope. It had shown him that even in apparent destruction there can be creation, and even in loss, there can be unexpected gain. Sleep came slowly that night, filled with dreams of flowing water, tiny fish, blooming flowers, and animals gathering around the pond. Rajiv dreamed of the villagers marveling at the miracle, of children laughing, and of the field thriving like never before. He woke with the first light of dawn, eager to see what further surprises the day might bring. By morning, the pond had grown even larger. Overnight, small rains had filled it slightly more, and the water had spread gently into the surrounding soil. Rajiv walked carefully along the edges, noticing the changes that had occurred while he slept. Tiny insects had created delicate patterns on the surface of the water, plants had grown taller, and the fish seemed even more active. The pond was alive, dynamic, and thriving. Villagers arrived once again, curious and eager. Some brought small jars and cups to observe the fish. Others simply wanted to witness the life that had emerged. Rajiv explained what he had observed, pointing out the streams, the plants, and the animals. Everyone listened intently, marveling at the transformation. Even the most skeptical among them had to admit that something extraordinary had happened. As the day progressed, more wildlife appeared. Birds nested near the edges, frogs croaked in harmony, and small mammals ventured closer than ever before. The land, which had once been ordinary, now hummed with energy and life. Rajiv felt a profound sense of connection, not just to the land but to the tree that had made all this possible. Its legacy, he realized, was not in its size or age, but in the hidden life it had nurtured all along. By evening, the villagers had begun discussing how to maintain the pond and protect the life it supported. They spoke of building small channels, planting more vegetation, and ensuring that the delicate ecosystem was not disturbed. Rajiv listened, nodding thoughtfully. He knew that the pond was a gift, a reminder of nature's hidden wisdom, and that it required care, respect, and understanding. As night fell, Rajiv returned home once again, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The tree, which had seemed ordinary and even troublesome, had revealed a hidden world of life. It had taught him that every living thing has a purpose, that water sustains life in ways humans often fail to see, and that sometimes destruction can lead to creation. He lay on his cot, listening to the sounds of the field, the water, and the animals. The pond glistened under the moonlight, a quiet, shimmering testament to life, patience, and the hidden wonders of nature. Rajiv realized that the story of the fallen tree and its water was far from over. It would continue to evolve, surprise, and teach lessons for years to come, not just to him but to everyone who witnessed its quiet miracle. The next morning, the village woke up to a sense of quiet excitement. Word of the pond and the life it had nurtured had spread to the neighboring fields, and even early risers noticed the unusual vibrancy of the land. Farmer Rajiv stepped outside once again, a mixture of curiosity, pride, and humility in his heart. He had witnessed the transformation over the past days, but today, he felt that the story was about to reveal something even more remarkable. As he approached the pond, he noticed that it had grown slightly overnight. The water glistened under the rising sun, reflecting the colors of the sky. Tiny ripples moved across the surface as the fish swam actively, and the plants along the edges had stretched taller, their leaves glistening with moisture. Birds swooped down to drink and bathe, adding bursts of movement and sound to the otherwise peaceful scene. Rajiv could not help but smile, marveling at the quiet miracle the fallen tree had created.